Hello, my name is Gareth. You're watching the Hub Online Network. Today we're sitting with our local MLA, Jackie Tegart. But let's get to it. All right, so Jackie Tegart is in studio this time. Last time we talked to you was just before Canada Day. And we were virtually doing our interview. So, how have you been?
Well, it's been an interesting spring and summer, and not just for me, but for everyone. Life in COVID is sometimes challenging, and as we look forward to what the fall and winter is going to look like, I'm sure a lot of people are really concerned about the news of a second wave and looking at the numbers and where the numbers are going in the province.
What have been some of the the bigger concerns that people have? Like, is there anything specific that people keep bringing up that they're looking for answers about what the government is looking to do, provincial government, I should say, is looking to do before it becomes a problem?
Well, as an opposition party, we've been very active in getting out and doing virtual meetings with different sectors in the province. We know that people are hurting, that financially they're hurting, that they're concerned about health care and making sure that everyone's safe, and that we don't open too early. I think going back to school has been a big challenge. Certainly some of the concerns I'm hearing is looking for consistency in message from public health. What are the rules and how do they apply to me, and how do they apply to me as I go out in my community and perhaps beyond? I think we had a lot of people for the first 3 or 4 months that never left our community. We were asked to stay at home and we did what we were asked. But as we start to go out a little bit more and as things opened up a bit, it was a bit eerie to make that first trip. I know that I went back to Victoria when the House was called back, and I drove to Victoria. We tried very hard to make sure that the people who attended on our behalf as the official opposition were able to get there safely, and I was able to drive, get on the ferry, and go to Victoria in a very safe manner. But even getting ready to go on that drive, what gas stations are open? Where do you stop? I packed food. On the ferry, you don't get out of your car. You've got a mask for any time you get out and you're around people. You don't know what the rules are. And it's just a very, very disconcerting time for everyone. I think we've also heard from small business, from industry, from just about every sector asking for what the rules are for them. And sometimes the rules have been less than clear. We, right at the beginning of COVID, as a party, as an opposition party, made a conscious decision that we would not politicize this health issue, that we would work with government, and you see that in the announcements from Minister Dix and Dr. Bonnie Henry, that often our health critic, Norm Letnick, was part of decision making. And we worked really hard to make sure that people knew that we were united and that we were on board. I think that that has worked extremely well. But as we look at the possibility today, and the buzz certainly in the Lower Mainland and Victoria, is that the Premier may be considering an early election. And to say that we're disappointed that he would use our actions during the pandemic to not oppose the work being done during the pandemic, and now take that and use it to perhaps call an early election, is extremely disappointing.
Before we get into the possibility of an imminent election, a snap election. There's so many quick terms for this. Let's just clarify as to what your riding is, and what your position in the opposition. Because you've recently been appointed to a shadow minister spot.
Well, the Fraser Nicola Riding goes from just south of Hope, all the way up the Fraser Canyon, over to Goldbridge and Braylorn outside of Lillooet, just north of 70 Mile, over to Lac Lejeune area in the Kamloops area, and over to between Princeton and Merritt, and down to the U.S. border through Manning Park. So it is a huge and diverse riding. For the last 5 years, I've served as the caucus chair in the opposition. And as caucus chair, you actually chair caucus meetings, but you have a lot of work to do on the Legislative Assembly management team. And so I served as a senior manager in our team as the opposition, but also served on the coordinating committee for the Legislative Assembly. So lots of work being done on policy, on how we run the legislature, and you're responsible for security, staff, the smooth running of the legislature, etc. So my role was very administrative and lots of work with people. And so I had the opportunity to work with the opposition, to work with government, to work with the Greens, and at a level where we had a common interest and very different than the debate in the House. I've recently, indicated to our leader, Andrew Wilkinson, that I was interested in doing a different role. And I am very pleased to be the critic for regional economic development and small business. I'm excited about the role because I think it'll be critically important as we look at economic recovery coming out of COVID. We're hearing from thousands of small businesses about how difficult it is right now to try and be in business and to be successful. And we know that small business is the generator of jobs in British Columbia. So I'm excited in this new role. I'll be working with Jazz Johal and Ben Stewart in this critic role of this ministry. And I can't wait to get going.
That was very exciting. So what do you criticize then? What is an example of what you would talk about?
Well, it would be things like we've done a lot of virtual roundtables with small business, with parents concerned about schools, with just about any issue that you could think of that people are concerned about during COVID. And we take those messages into the House. So we do it during question period, we do it during debates on estimates. During the estimate process, the critic goes through the minister's budget line by line. So we take the input that we hear from stakeholders, and we hold government to account for what they promised and what they're delivering or not delivering. And that's an exciting role to play, particularly around regional economic development and making sure that there are plans in place, there's commitments to funding, and that we stay on track. Same with business. I think that small business, we have seen so many stories of small businesses that have been there for, mom and pop operations that have been in the community for 40, 50 years who are saying, we're just closing our doors. We've had enough. They have gone through COVID. Whether their business was allowed to be open or not, they had the overhead costs. We urged government, we urged them to forgive the PST, the employer health tax, and other taxes that government collects from small business to help them get through the summer and perhaps get some money in their bank accounts. Government refused to do that. They deferred the taxes, and we know that small business taxes are due September 30th. And I think that we're going to see a devastating number of businesses close their doors because they cannot afford to pay those taxes.
Right. Just on that note, locally, businesses, the deadline is September 30th, but they don't accrue interest until January 1st. Does that mean that they have the opportunity to pay up until the end of December?
I'm not clear on that. I don't know the answer to that question. I wouldn't try to tell you something I didn't know.
No, fair enough.
But what we're hearing from small business people are honest and straightforward, and they don't like to pay their taxes, but they like to pay their taxes on time. And so to put them in a position where they've had a very slow summer, we've had no tourists coming across the line or international, and they're struggling to pay their rent, to pay their staff, and their overhead. And so we felt that a good plan would be for the government to assist by forgiving those taxes for the 6-month period, to get them on their feet, to keep them running through the winter season. So what we're hearing from small businesses is not only did government not do that, they increased the minimum wage in June to $15 an hour. So the other thing that small business asked is, please don't increase our costs. And government ignored that also. And so we've got a lot of work to do around advocating for small businesses.
So are you taking you're saying thousands and thousands of small businesses. How does that specifically affect your riding? Is there still lots of businesses in our riding that are affected by this as well? Because I know I've talked about this with other people, and like Ashcroft isn't necessarily massively affected by that specific idea. But as the riding as a whole, are you seeing lots of that in Fraser Nicola?
I think we see it depending on what your business is.
Okay.
We're certainly hearing from tourism-related businesses that they are devastated, that they're having difficulty, especially if your clientele is from out of country. We have seen some businesses come to us and say that they've seen an uptake when people were allowed to leave their homes, leave their communities, and vacation in British Columbia. But there are many businesses that have seen a decrease in their income by 50 to 80%. Their overhead has not changed. And so for them to survive, they're looking to government to help them through that transition. And we'll be putting ideas forward to government to ensure that happens. One of the things that small businesses have had to pick up is the cost of the public health orders. So sanitizers, masks, signage for restaurants. Many restaurants are operating at 50% of their seating capacity and still have to have staff there. So how do you make enough money to pay your overhead and your staff when you're running at 50%? And so we're listening, and we're hearing from people what the concerns are, and we're taking those to government.
Beyond taxes, are there subsidies that currently any pots of money that businesses can go for to help, like a CERB or something along those lines?
Some businesses would have qualified, but what we're hearing from people is that there are a number of programs that they don't qualify for.
Right.
And even though it was specific to assist businesses, it's not something that they've been able to qualify for. So government provided a commercial rent subsidy, but most of the businesses we talked to indicated that it was so heavy in paperwork and in red tape that it required a partnership between the landlord and the business that's renting, that they didn't bother going through the process because it was so cumbersome.
And you feel that giving a break on certain taxes between now and next year would mitigate this problem for the next 6 months?
What do we need to do in order to ensure that our businesses' doors stay open? If you're a restaurant owner in one of our small communities and you were closed for the first 3 months of COVID and you had to pay your rent, you had food in your freezers and in your fridges, and you had to, that food spoils or you give it away. If you were lucky enough to be able to do a takeout, how long did it take for you to make enough money to keep your kitchen open to run a takeout service? And that wasn't just for 1 month. That was for an extended period of time. And so the question is, what are small businesses asking for and what would help them out? And so we do roundtables with small businesses across the province and ask them, what are the biggest challenges for you to keep your doors open? So we have some small businesses in many communities that did very well during COVID. I think that I recently sent out a newsletter and said my gardens never looked so good, because for people to survive the lockdown, many of us spent a lot of time in the garden. That was sort of how you stayed healthy, how you got outside, and how you produced something. And so I would suspect that many garden centers would tell you they did quite well in the spring. But you talk to a restaurant owner whose doors were closed and who, it took quite some time for people to get the message that their doors were open for them to take food home, and how cautious people were about not buying food from elsewhere, right? So I would suspect that we've had businesses like hardware stores, food stores, gardening centers, etc. I think we could all name a number of them that would tell you they did pretty well because people stayed home and they supported their local businesses. But we also have a segment of the business community that weren't so lucky. And I would suspect they are still struggling.
Right.
And I think that it's important that government not do a blanket program that they think fits everybody, because it doesn't. We need to listen to small businesses, and we need to look at ways that government can help them.
Well, it really has been a shame with small businesses. Have you been in talks with people like Deb Arnott and Community Futures? Are they involved or at the table with any of this stuff? Or?
Absolutely. We've done, I think, 2 roundtables in Fraser Nicola, and we've got one planned for next week. And there are organizations that are out there working very hard to support small businesses, but training and programs being announced and a perception that we're helping small business when you're the small business that it doesn't fit is pretty tough. And I think it's going to be particularly difficult in the next 2 to 3 months, and tough decisions are going to be made. And I think that as local governments and as regional governments, we need to take a look at what is the impact going to be. As a local leader, have you talked to your business community? Do you have a sense of what the next 4 to 6 months looks like for them? And are there ways that you can lobby on their behalf to make sure that their doors stay open? We have seen an incredible uptake in online shopping, and we need to think about what that means in our local communities and to our small businesses. And although there may be some opportunities when you look at that wave of online shopping, it also impacts every business in our region. So we're in a new world. COVID has been extremely disruptive, and it has disrupted in a way that wasn't 1 week. You know, sometimes things happen in the world and things change for 5 to 7 days, and then people go back to the old ways. I don't know that we're going to go back to the old way. And we need to be thinking about what we value in communities, what makes our communities healthy, and I think small business is part of that. And it may look different given 2 to 3 years down the road. But I think we need to be thinking about that, and we need to be planning for that rather than just letting it happen.
Well, in the short term, one of the things, of course, on the horizon is the possibility of a second wave of COVID. I haven't heard Adrian Dix or Bonnie Henry say anything about the possibility of shutting everything down again. But in BC, COVID numbers on the rise and maintaining at about 105 people a day on average. If we go any higher, do you think that there's the possibility of another lockdown?
Well, I think it would be very difficult to go back. I think that Dr. Henry has been very considerate in what she has asked us to do. I don't know that, I think that she has been pretty clear that we likely will not go back to a total lockdown. But that's not to say that things can't change. So she has done an absolutely excellent job as a public health officer. We've worked with her with our previous government, and she is a public health officer for British Columbia. So I think she's done an excellent job. I think we'll listen to what she has to say and follow her direction. And she has the expertise that keeps us safe.
Okay. Well, let's jump into probably the most meatiest bit of what's going on recently, and that is, of course, the opportunity to have a snap election, as mentioned before. So let's talk about the pros and cons to both the Liberals and the NDP side to what a overnight election might mean to the province.
Well, to say that we would be disappointed to have John Horgan call an election, an early election, in the next couple of weeks would be an understatement. We've been very clear that we do not believe that it is the time to go to the polls, that we're in the middle of a pandemic. And there is no reason for John Horgan to call an election except that he's riding high in the polls and he thinks he can win a majority government. We passed legislation that set dates for elections so that this kind of discussion and disruption didn't happen anymore. And we've been following that legislation for at least 4 elections. We know when the election date is. Politics aren't played with, oh, are we going to have an election or not? And the public knows when the election is. And so with the set dates, we do our work, we know when the election's coming, and everybody knows the rules. You can see that the last couple of weeks, the question about the election has just been riding the media waves like crazy. And it makes people go, well, why would we have an election right now? And, you know, we worked really hard as an official opposition not to politicize the pandemic, to not question and to support the work being done by Dr. Bonnie Henry. And by the Premier suggesting there may be an election. You know, we trusted that that he would appreciate that we did not politicize this health crisis. And I can say personally, I'm disappointed that he's playing games at a time when he should be governing. He should be looking at the recovery. He should be looking at the unemployment numbers that we have in British Columbia. And he should be providing a plan that is 6 months overdue for how we're going to recover from COVID-19.
So I've, up until today, I've actually never heard of an election being done like this. I've heard of minority governments getting in trouble and the vote of no confidence, and thus we have an election. But I've never heard of a premier calling something when everything is seemingly fine. Which the first thing that jumped to my mind, and I don't like giving a personal opinion in these things, but the first thing that jumped to my mind was, okay, so everything's going well. If we vote now, they might do better now. But is there a shoe that's going to drop if we don't vote now?
Well, if I was Premier John Horgan, I'd be looking at the polling numbers. People say, there is no doubt that British Columbia has done very well through Dr. Bonnie Henry in its response to the pandemic. And so when people say to me that Premier Horgan has done a great job, British Columbia has done a great job. And part of it is that we came together as three parties and said this is a pandemic, it is a health crisis, and we're not going to play politics with it. We are going to listen to the public health officer. Now, Premier Horgan has, his actions are reflected in the polls, and he is taking a political risk in considering an early election. It is pure politics because we know that we are looking at a second wave coming. We know that we are $12.5 billion in debt due to the COVID outcomes and what COVID has meant to the economy. We know it could be worse than that. We also know that the unemployment is going to be huge. We know CERB is ending. We know small businesses' taxes are coming due. We have yet to see, quite honestly, the huge impact of COVID on our economy and on what it means to live in British Columbia. So if you're John Horgan, you're looking at the numbers and you've got no place to go but down. And so strategically, for your own party and for nothing but politics, he is considering an early election. And he's being very coy about it.
Right.
And because he won't give a straight answer, it causes speculation everywhere. We don't need to be thinking about an election right now. We need to be thinking about our economy. We need to be thinking about the people who are worried about making their mortgage payments, who are worried about their kids being safe in school, who are worried about how their community is going to survive COVID. We don't need an election. John Horgan has a stable government that will be stable until there's a confidence vote. And that could be in February for the budget, but we have an election scheduled for October 2021. And it's appalling to me that he is causing this unrest during this time when there is no need.
What do you think is the actual likelihood of it happening?
Well,
because so far you're right. He's been very coy. He hasn't been saying yes, we're going to do this, or no, we're not going to do this. Like, don't worry about it. There's going to be no election. He's always kind of going, right? Like,
yep.
Maybe. So, in your opinion, with the way that things are and the way that things are going, do you think it's likely or unlikely?
Well, what I'm seeing is a number of NDP cabinet ministers announcing that they're stepping down. I understand, rumor has it that all government advertising stops as of midnight Sunday. And that's what happens during a writ period. Elections BC is out securing community buildings in order to have an election. They're putting their staff in place. As soon as John Horgan made a suggestion of the possibility of an election, Election BC has to kick in gear and get ready. Bonnie Henry has indicated that she has met with Elections BC and that they're preparing a plan. There's all kinds of indicators that people are getting prepared. I can tell you, we've been spending a lot of time, certainly I have, in making sure my team is ready and that we're ready to hit the ground running. But what an election will look like during COVID is another question. So I believe, when you listen to the political pundits, they're saying 80% chance of an election. And when we look at what happened in New Brunswick, that was a government that tried very hard to get a plan together to guarantee that they would not be taken down during the COVID process, and couldn't get that agreement and chose to go to the people, and they won that election. But the governing party decided there would be no door knocking.
Right.
Because people don't want strangers at their door during COVID. Like, what would an election look like? And so it's absolutely, I just find it unbelievable that a premier who has a stable government during a pandemic where the numbers are increasing and people are extremely concerned, that he would play around being coy about whether he's going to call an election or not.
So let's assume that it does happen. And we're talking about knocking on doors and stuff. Do you have a possible plan for what you might do to circumvent knocking on doors, like cold calls, or
Well, as everyone knows, during an election, for the first week you answer your phone and then you don't anymore because there's lots of phone calling. One of the challenges would be, number one, how to safely run an election, and I'm sure Dr. Bonnie Henry will require every campaign to have a safety plan. Number two, how do we ensure all of our volunteers are safe? Do we open offices, right? Because how many of the public can you have coming into an office? Not very many. Signage will be extremely important. Mail drops. It will be a different campaign. There will not be rallies. There will not be community meetings. There will be lots of technology. And there's an assumption that everybody has access to technology, when we know in rural BC particularly, we don't. And that's one of the challenges with equity in the school system as we look at kids being back in the classroom and doing distance learning. We, I think, through COVID, have realized that what we thought was adequate internet isn't. And so an election would be very virtual. It would have to be safe. It would have to be partial mail-in versus going to the polls. It would have to have lots of advanced polling. How to get your message out is going to be challenging because we know a lot of people don't have home phone numbers anymore. And how do you get people's cell numbers? It will be extremely challenging, particularly if it is on short notice.
I guess the one question I haven't asked you about this is, and you have alluded to it, and I'm just clarifying for the people at home. You are running again.
I am running again. Yes.
Awesome. And do you know who your possible, because I don't know who the Green person might be, but there's been rumor of an NDP opponent.
Yes, I understand that Aaron Sam from Merritt has been appointed as the NDP candidate.
Word on the street is that the Fraser Nicola is considered to be a swing riding. What are your thoughts on that term for this area?
Well, it certainly has been considered a swing riding because it was represented by the NDP for 17 years. So when we won in 2013, it was quite an upset and quite a surprise. We won in 2017, and we will work very, very hard to be successful whenever the election's called. I hope that people will consider the work that's been done while I've been their MLA and take a look. And I really believe in elections and in I appreciate that we live in a country where democracy is valued and where we have the opportunity to choose who represents us. And so to me, elections are exciting times. They're the opportunity to share with people the work we've done. And I think it's really, really important to give people a choice. So yes, I'm running, and it's because I love the work.
So if so you're running, and let's again assume that there's an election that's going to happen in October. From what you ran on last time, what would some of the new campaign, what's what I'm looking for? The things that you want to do for the next 4 years. What would you say is a goal of yours?
Well, you know, when I ran in 2013, one of the priorities was economic development, and particularly around the Ashcroft terminal, and support for forestry, because forestry is so incredibly important along with mining in our region. So when I look at some of the successes we've had, I think that the Ashcroft terminal has come a long way since I first got elected. We've seen infrastructure builds throughout the riding. We've seen changes in the riding boundary. So last time when I ran, I talked about the importance of the Fraser Canyon, and that we have an absolute treasure in our riding that is so underutilized. And we've brought together the people through the Fraser Canyon, First Nations, local government, all the ministries that service the Fraser Canyon, and we've talked about economic development in that corridor. We are in the process of doing a master tourism plan for Yale to Lytton, and I'm excited to hear what communities are planning for economic development in that region. So we're talking about healthy communities where people have good jobs and where people can contribute to the place where they live. So I think that that work continues. Healthcare definitely has been an issue and will continue to be an issue. We've seen the opening of the emergency room in Merritt, which was a huge project. We've certainly seen a very active health committee here in Ashcroft, Cache Creek area. There's lots of exciting things going on in the region. And it's not that we have to do it, it's that we're there to support people in the projects they want to do, and to make sure that if there's government support for that, we're at the table making sure that the advocacy is strong and focused, so that we can be successful in delivering dollars and government support to the region.
And on a broader strokes, not just for the Fraser Nicola, what do you feel would be some of the things that the Liberal Party could do different, I hate to say the word better, but different or better than the current government if the Liberals won the election?
Well, my sense, I was 2 years while we were in government and have now been close to 4 since we've been in opposition. Way better being in government, I can tell you that, because you can get things done. But the important thing, I think, in my role that I played as caucus chair is I was able to build relationships with the Greens and with ministers in the NDP. And so we've been pretty successful in advocating as an opposition member to government for projects throughout the region. My sense of what are going to be the issues in British Columbia, I think we're all waiting with bated breath today to see what the recovery plan is that the government is tabling. 1.5 billion was approved by the legislature unanimously. All of us agreed that we needed recovery money. So we're awaiting the announcements today. I suspect that the government will use that $1.5 billion to set their agenda for an early election. I look at issues that are in the forefront in the province. The economy will be incredibly important. Jobs, family supporting jobs. I look at homelessness and the issues around tent cities, around people who are most vulnerable, and certainly talking to our critic on homelessness and poverty. She talks about the fact that we need to quit lumping everyone together, and we need to actually know what our homeless population is. We have people who are homeless because they cannot afford rent. We have people who are homeless because they have mental issues and addiction issues. We have people who are homeless because they are activists. You know, there are different reasons why people are homeless. And to lump everybody together into the same group, I think, has not proved successful for the government. I would suggest to you when the government was in opposition, they had all kinds of answers for how to fix the problems. But what we've seen is homelessness has gotten worse. Affordability has gotten worse. Mental health and addictions has gotten worse. And there are no simple answers. And I think that's going to continue to be a challenge and one that we all need to work together on. The other thing I think that we will, I think is an issue in British Columbia is the urban-rural split. We have way more in common than we have different. And I think that, you know, when we talk about mining, and people think, when they think mining, they think about Highland Valley Copper. When people in Vancouver think mining, they think about Highland Valley Copper and a huge hole in the ground. But when I think about mining, I think about the number of head offices in Vancouver, the number of accounting firms that count on those head offices. And sometimes we forget how integrated we are with urban and rural. And if we don't have the natural resources working in rural BC, we don't have the infrastructure of head offices and support to those head offices working in the urban centers. And there's lots more in common than we have difference, and we need to take a look at that and how do we share that information. Because I think that we have seen a huge divide between above hope and below hope.
One could say that up here we're beyond hope.
No, I
I'm
always
just
say
kidding.
above
I'm
hope.
just kidding.
I've heard that, but my favorite saying is, I live above hope.
Nice. You mentioned before that rural internet is a problem. Is that something that you would be looking at, or is that more of I know Brad Viss has talked about that. Is that more of a federal thing?
I think it's a partnership.
Okay.
And I think that COVID has highlighted the weaknesses in the internet and in broadband. And so I think every one of us who is on a Zoom call and gets kicked out 2 or 3 times knows the frustration of not having appropriate broadband in our rural communities. And so we need to work with the federal government, with local government, and the provincial government to put a plan together that ensures there's equity across the province. And not just because of business. We need to think about that for education also. We have a lot of kids right now, or young people, who are attending university virtually. And the opportunity to stay home in Terrace should be the same as the opportunity to stay home in Burnaby. And so I think that, as people learn to be comfortable with the new way, they may make choices that unless I need to be on the campus, I'm not going to spend money to go to the campus, to rent an apartment, to have to get a part-time job, etc. I'm way more comfortable doing my work at home. So I think that we're going to see shifts, and we need to make sure the infrastructure is there to support what choice people are making.
Do you think that there's room to go back to the way it was before, like back into the schools, back into whatever pre-COVID, or do you feel like it's a more natural move to go to these more virtual things for beyond the vaccine and forever?
Well, I think that a number of people and families have reassessed, because I think the thing about COVID also is it made us slow down. It made us stay home. It made us eat at home. It made us not be on that treadmill where we've got 3 kids who need to be in 3 different places to play sports. It made us rethink our social interactions and how important they are. It certainly, I think, also highlighted to people that technology will never take the place of personal interaction. So I think a lot of people are reassessing lifestyle. They're reassessing whether they want to live in a place like perhaps an urban center, in an apartment that had 2 kids in it and 2 parents working, and the parks were closed. And where do you go outside? I mean, those of us in rural British Columbia really, really needed to be appreciative of the opportunities that we had during COVID and during the lockdown. So I think that there is room for some people to go back to what was normal, but I'm not sure that that's going to be the norm for everybody.
Right.
And I think we're going to see a lot of people take a look at how COVID affected their family and what they want their future to look like. I'm understanding from many people that I've talked to in real estate that real estate is selling like crazy because we're seeing people want to get out of the city.
We talked a lot about the possibility of an election.
Yep.
What if there was no election? What are some of the things that you are currently working on that if there's no election you would just keep moving forward with? Or what would the NDP have? Are you privy to anything that they have in store for the province moving forward?
Well, today we'll hear the recovery plan from the government, and of course we'll take a look at that and be the voice of people in communities that have concerns about that recovery plan. We'll also support good ideas. If there's good stuff in there, let's get it going and let's make it happen. We have continued our work. We closed our office for a short period of time to the public. We opened again in June with safety measures from the provincial health officer. We are not doing personal meetings in our offices because of concerns about social distancing, etc. But the office doors are open and people are welcome to go in and talk to staff and talk about, drop off any issues, etc. So we're doing our work differently, but the work continues, and we've been really busy. You know, there's been lots of challenges for organizations. We're hearing from nonprofits. We're hearing from people who, you know, organizations that traditionally had fundraisers who now find themselves not able to meet their overhead because they can't fundraise. You know, we're also hearing across the province from groups that continue to want to meet in a safe way, but because of Dr. Henry's orders can't, such as large church communities. And you know, you have a church that seats 1,300 people, and they're allowed less than 50, and yet you can go into a restaurant and see, or Walmart, or Costco, and see more people than that. And so people are questioning whether there's consistency. Right. So we're hearing from those people, and we're sending those concerns forward to have them answered through our health critic. We've been really busy, and we will continue on with the Fraser Canyon project. We will continue to advocate, as I've been on UBCM calls this week and next week, as municipal governments and regional districts advocate for projects in the region. We'll do follow-up on those with each of the communities, and it will be life in the new norm.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit.
Yep.
So for you, I just want to see if you have an opinion on anything, or what provincial governments have a say over. Are you, so for local issues that are happening in Ashcroft and Cache Creek, are you privy to what has been going on between the SLU and the newly formed Ashcroft SLU Society?
I will be meeting with them this week.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Secondarily, what, if any, oversight does provincial government have over municipal government?
Very limited. It is through the community charters and through legislation that the the parameters for municipal governments. That's the rules, and so there is I think there's very limited opportunity to override municipal governments.
Yeah. So at this moment in time, that's all of this. Because I'm assuming that we're going to be very busy with you in the next 3 weeks to a month. So I'm gonna let you go there, unless there's anything specifically that you wanted to bring up and talk about.
Well, I would just like to say to everyone that we know it's been difficult, that ever since March, we have been living our lives differently. And I know that there's people who are very concerned and very scared to go out. I know that neighbors have been helping neighbors. Community have been setting up systems so that people who are alone can reach out and can be assisted. I'd just like to say that I'm very proud of how the community has responded to COVID. We can't ever say that we're COVID-free. We don't know who carries the virus. And every time I go out, I think to myself, if I got COVID, am I able to trace who I've been with? And as difficult as it is to be away from friends and to tighten your bubble, as the numbers go up, I want you to be very diligent about the public health officer's direction. She is an incredibly well-experienced epidemiologist who knows her business. and has led us through this in a stellar way. And so I want to thank you for following her lead. I want to ask people to stay safe. I want people to know that as a community we're doing well, and hopefully we come out the other end of this a better community. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for the work you do, and it's a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much. And that all being said, Dr. Bonnie Henry, if you're watching, wherever you are, we hope that you're having a fantastic day. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank
and
you.
We'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
You bet.